I have a bit of a soft spot for a lot of old school internet horror, and that is definitely the case when it comes to classic creepypastas. If I'm being real, a lot of the old creepypastas haven't really aged all too well. Of course, there are a select few here and there that I think held up really well, and I can at least show some appreciation when looking at some fantastic works down the road that took some level of inspiration from a lot of these old school classic creepypastas. But more often than not, a lot of the writing of said creepypastas can be incredibly clunky and downright goofy, which can certainly be amusing in a guilty pleasure sense, but can also be such a letdown when you think, this was scary? This scared me? Am I just lame?
Look, Pip, I know it's our job to help this guy and everything, but I think this guy's a lost cause. He's obviously made up his mind. Why don't we just cut our losses and get out of here?
Even so, I couldn't really hate these classic creepypastas, mainly because of the nostalgia I have for them. Not only that, but there have been a lot of recreations and reinterpretations of these creepypastas that give some pretty interesting results. One specific creepypasta that I've seen countless recreations of is MOUSE.AVI. It's something that I've had a interesting little relationship with, to say the least. Because while I now see some obvious flaws it has when it comes to repetition and pacing, this used to be pure nightmare fuel for me. Aside from a couple videos that take a more unique approach to the story or have some great qualities to them, we can all at least somewhat agree that its formula has been used over and over again to the point where it's not as shocking as it once was. However, what if I were to tell you that there was a MOUSE.AVI video that not only remains accurate to the original story, but also contains subtle changes that, intentional or not, drastically alter things in the best way possible? Allow me to point you in the direction of this video made by Ermel, simply titled Mouse. Of all the MOUSE.AVI videos that I've seen, I would choose this as my crowning champion. It's a neat little package that has an amazing sense of progression, technicality, and just overall tone. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, so I thought that I would make this video discussing what sets this apart from others, some qualities I particularly enjoyed, and some interpretations I got out of this. If you haven't seen it already, please watch it, because I will be talking about a lot of details in this, and I'd hate to spoil it. Link is in description, so watch that and come on back. And with that being said, let's get right to it. We start off with an image of Mickey walking down the street accompanied by some piano music. It's pretty much a classic staple in MOUSE.AVI in general. But there's something about the piano in this animation specifically that sets itself apart from others, and that is its strangely calming nature. When looking at a lot of popular MOUSE.AVI videos, the pianos in the first act are certainly disturbing and invoke a sense of command, and while there are points where it does feel a little overkill and overly abrasive, at its best, it can certainly leave a long-lasting impression on the viewer. This time, though, it's different. Instead of having the music take center stage, the music takes on a more hypnotic and muffled tone. It almost feels like some sort of lure to create intrigue with the viewer instead of scaring them right off the bat. And while the keys of the piano do sound like they're being played at random, there's a bit of a foreboding rhythm going on, as if something terrible is approaching. One particular detail I find fascinating is how the piano starts becoming more hectic in its final moments before being snuffed out, with only the sound of static of a projector being played. Another aspect in the first act that feels complementary to the overall mood is Mickey himself. The walk cycle is very well put together. Something I really appreciate is the weight placed into each step he takes. It's little technical details like that that I really admire, especially considering how tricky animation can be. But one other aspect I find more interesting the more I think about is Mickey's posture and facial expression. In a lot of other videos I've seen, Mickey is usually shown looking down and depressed, maybe with a smidge of concern or sadness on his face, his posture looking as if he's in some sort of deep thought. In this case, the way that Mickey looks forward with a blank expression, his arms dangling by his sides, the emotion enforced feels less depressed and more empty. It's this trait that adds on to the ambiguity of the first act. At this point, I already really love how the animation doesn't show its hand right away. It sets things up in a very unassuming yet intriguing way, like it's laying down some groundwork before things start getting out of hand. So after 3 minutes of darkness, we cut back to Mickey, and it's at this point where we get our first taste of the screams. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone and their mom knows the typical scream that was used in a lot of MOUSE.AVI videos. And while they used to scare the absolute shit out of me, nowadays it doesn't really impact me all too much. Mainly because of it being overused at this point and being so one note. And it certainly doesn't help to the extent the scream is used. I mean, sure, it's effective for the first 10 seconds, but when you loop it to the point where it lasts several minutes, no thank you. But the screams here in this animation act less like a coherent scream and more like some horrid, abstract soundscape that blends in with the distorted background. In fact, I would go on to say that the sound design in general throughout the animation is fantastic, but it's this sequence where it really hits its peak. The way the noises swirl and distort themselves, growing only harsher as the animation progresses, reminds me of something bands like Nurse with Wound would experiment with. It's quite harrowing, but it works. The streets themselves begin to shape into a more nightmarish look, not just in how they look decrepit, but as if the streets and the buildings themselves are slowly unraveling into oblivion. And the colors are an excellent addition to it. I feel like they add an almost supernatural sense to the animation. I particularly love the flashes of color that lay on top of the landscape, as I feel like the shapes they take remind me of the fires of hell or a specter of some sorts. With that being said, I find it no coincidence that the moment the colors start to show, Mickey's face begins to contort into a hideous grin. The transformation from his normal expression to this new look is jarring, but the execution is just right on the money. And the way he starts to pick up his pace as his surroundings begin to worsen perfectly reflect a sense of madness. The second act as a whole is just a masterclass of sight and sound, showcasing a dark descent into the depths of whatever hell we see displayed in front of us. And right when we hit an echelon of noise, it stops. We end with Mickey's face, accompanied with split-second flashes of Russian text, mutilated versions of Mickey, and a picture of a cartoon glove holding a gun in the final frame. Now, what might seem as a simple epilogue is actually something that contains little details and secrets that recontextualize the events that happened prior. This is where things are gonna feel a little conspiratorial, but bear with me here. When translating the Russian text, it reads out as follows.
Why did I have to be so selfish to end up like this? Wanted to start life over, but how naive I was. With a broken mind, I must carry on. Like a rat in a maze. I'll drown in my own mind. pulling the trigger in hell, just repeating the cycle, walking the endless streets of hell, just wishing to be alive again. I don't want to be alive again when I die. Hell is waiting for you at the end, so live while you can. I feel like I'm suffering, but I don't feel pain. I feel my heart beating, but I don't need to breathe. My legs are tired, but the road never ends. Is this my own little hell, or am I just the last one? Sue wasn't the answer for me. I learned that the hard way. True regret is unknown. True regret is unknown. True regret is unknown.
Now, this acts as a sort of left hook to the typical narrative seen in a lot of the MOUSE.AVI videos. The way I see it, the narrative usually revolves around Mickey being in some sort of turmoil, resulting in his reality becoming a disturbed shell of its former self, most likely as a reflection of Mickey's depression, before Mickey ultimately takes his own life. However, with what we have out of the translations, what if what we saw prior wasn't Mickey's loosened grip on reality, but instead him traversing through the depths of hell? And then there's the fact that the original phrase, real suffering is not known, is replaced with true regret is unknown. This could perhaps be an indicator as to where Mickey's mind is at. It's almost as if there's a part of him that's become complacent with the endless suffering, and yet there's always this overwhelming sense of regret looming over him. Regret for taking his life for granted, now being forever trapped in a cycle of torment known as death. It's this concept that feels so much scarier than what's typically seen in MOUSE.AVI. But that's not it. There's also a bit of a fourth wall break that occurs in this instance. Notice how the animation is presented. There's a border along the edges of the frame, most likely to replicate the feel of an old film reel. Everything stays within the frame, even the colors that occur throughout the second act. The only time things go past the frame is during the epilogue, specifically with the text, jittering images, and the final frame being a picture all on its own. Now, one would probably make the assumption that this was an error on the creator's part, but considering how things have been precise beforehand, I wouldn't make that assumption quite yet. If you think about it, even though things are presented in the style of an old film reel, we are still viewing this on a digital device. Think about it. Consider that one of the big appeals of MOUSE.AVI was how a supposedly cursed Mickey Mouse short was out there somewhere on the internet under said file name. Now imagine the Russian text as a cry for help from some entity trying to communicate through whatever means necessary. What if those glitches of text and images weren't some technical slip-up, but instead interference from whatever or whoever's on the other side? And then there's the final frame. And, well, I'll just leave things at this. Now, what if, and just what if, it wasn't just an indicator on how Mickey took his own life? What if it's an offer towards the viewer to take their own lives themselves? I mean, after all, the gates of hell beckon the curious. And on that note, even if there's a possibility that I'm looking into things too much, the fact that my mind went to such lengths out of admiration for this animation speaks volumes. And this is why this particular animation sticks out to me. Because the care that's put into the little things that make all the difference, making it feel like an intriguing puzzle to decipher. It also happens to look great and sound even better, and the way things progressed was absolutely killer. I freaking love this, and I don't think I'll ever get tired of it. And Ermel, if you happen to be watching this, I don't know if what I just said was intentional or not in your thought process in making this, but just know that you should be proud with what you made. I mean, it was enough to get me to work on making this video. It's great work. Thanks so much to everyone who's stuck around this long. If you enjoyed this, please consider liking and subscribing. It means so much to me, more than you know. And if you hated this, that's tough, but I'm still glad you gave this the time of day. This took a lot of work to get done, and I'm planning on making more like this in the future. Thanks again. My name is Valentino, and as always, goodbye, friends!